What factors influence the size of human population? Population size increases because of birth and immigration and decreases through deaths and emigration. The average number of children born to women in the population, called total fertility rate, is the key factor that determines population size. The human population can grow, decline, or remain fairly stable. Human populations of countries and cities grow or decline through the interplay of three factors: births, called fertility, deaths, or mortality, and migration, which includes immigration coming into an area and emigration leaving an area. It can be summed up with this general equation: the change in population is equal to the births plus immigration minus deaths and emigration. Crude birth rate is the number of live births per 1,000 people in a population in a given year, which is a way of measuring birth rates. Crude death rate is the number of deaths per year, or deaths per 1,000 people in a population in a given year. Here's a figure that shows current, or at least population sizes for several countries as of 2008 and projections through 2025. You can see the most populous country is China, with 1.3 billion people in 2008, and is projected to increase to 1.5 billion by 2025. India, second most populous country, is at 1.1 billion, and by 2025, 1.4 billion. And I seem to recall projections showing that India will pass China in population size by 2050, although that's not shown on this. The third most populous country in the world is the United States, with 304 million, and projected to increase to 357 million by 2025. Then there's some of the other countries with the higher populations in the world and their projections as well. At the very bottom there's Japan with 128 million, and above that is Russia with 142 million as of 2008. You can see those are two countries where the population is expected to decline. So that's interesting. Women having fewer babies, but not few enough to stabilize the world's population. Another measurement used in population studies is fertility rate. This is the number of children born to a woman during her lifetime. Two types of fertility rate affect a country's population size and growth rate. They are replacement level fertility rate and total fertility rate. Replacement level fertility, this is the average number of children that a couple in the population must bear to replace themselves. In other words, they have enough children to where they don't contribute to any increase in the net population growth. And this rate varies. It depends on whether you live in a developed, industrialized country or a developing country where there's more poverty. This level in developed nations is 2.1, but as high as 2.5 in some developing countries. So the question is, why isn't it exactly 2? Shouldn't it be 2 children per couple to replace the couple? The problem here is that there is an infant mortality rate. So if some of the children die before they reach their reproductive years, or even earlier, before they hit the age of 5, then the actual average would be a little higher than 2. This was actually discussed in the paper I had you all read at the very beginning of the year. This paper, though, or it was a chapter out of this book called The Bottleneck. So if all couples, this is interesting, had an average of only 2.1 children, they would not be contributing to the population growth. But if all of today's girl children also have 2.1 children, the world's population will continue to grow for 50 more years. This is an example of lag time for a change to occur. So right now, if every female child grew up and had only 2.1, which would be the replacement level for developed countries. In other words, they wouldn't contribute to net population growth. Why would the population continue to grow for 50 more years? This is because the people right now who are currently in their reproductive years having children, and then there are children right now who aren't old enough and haven't had kids yet, are now going to grow up within the next 50 years and have their own children. So once that took place, then you would have a leveling and zero growth in the population. So there's that lag time. A great example of how human population is a natural system that has a lag time to it. And then now with total fertility rate, this is the average number of children born to a woman in a population during, or to women in a population during their reproductive years. So let me reread that again. This is total fertility rate is the average number of children born to women in a population during their reproductive years. So it's the average, basically, per woman in a population. This is 1.6 in developed countries, which is lower than the replacement level. And this is down from 2.5 in 1950. So over time, in developed industrialized countries, the rate has dropped. And this is 2.8 in developing countries, and this is down from 6.5 kids per woman in 1950. So these are in countries that have are developing. So there's in areas where there's higher rates of poverty and the economy is not as good there. So now we have a case study. The U.S. population is growing rapidly. And when we ask, well, how could this be if the fertility rates are at or below, for this developed country, if they're at or below the total fertility rate, that would suggest just basic replacement level. So there has been an overall drop in total fertility rate and birth rates. And we'll look at figures 6.4 and 6.5. Though the population is still growing faster than other developed countries. There should be countries right there. From 1900 to 2008, population increased here in the United States 4 times, from 76 million to 304 million. Projections have it at 430 million by 2050 and 571 million by 2100. Is the U.S. population. In contrast, population growth in other developed countries has slowed. So there's a consequence to this growth here in the U.S. As we studied earlier, the per capita use of resources is much higher in the U.S. on average than in other countries. In fact, it's twice as much as in other developed countries and as much as 12 times in very poor nations. So with each individual, you add a greater footprint. So there's a higher per capita ecological footprint by each addition to the population. And what this can result in is an enormous environmental impact. There are some amazing changes that took place in the 20th century. And we'll look at another figure to show those changes. And these changes led to a dramatic increase in per capita resource use. So we'll look at that figure as well, figure 6.6, which resulted here in the U.S. That's why we use lots and lots of resources beyond that of any other developed country. So first of all, this is just a graph showing sort of the exponential growth of the population here in the United States from near its beginnings, 1790, to and projections through 2100. So they see a continued increase. Seems to be slowing down right about here, maybe leveling off at some point further into the future. Here's figure 6.4. This shows total fertility rates for the United States from 1917 to 2008. And there's a question posed on this figure here. It says the U.S. fertility rate has declined and remained at or below replacement levels since 1972. So why is the population of the United States still increasing? So here we see right here along the vertical axis, there is the replacement level for developed countries, 2.1. We see that in 1917, we were above the replacement level, and then we begin to see this drop occur here to replacement level, and then we see an increase here after World War II, which they call that time where there was an increase in the number of births called the baby boom, and so the births per woman increased here in the U.S. And then after 64, we start to see a decline in the number of births per woman here in the U.S. to where they're now below or right at replacement level. So the question is why? Why are we still increasing in population size if the total fertility rate would suggest that we should be leveling off and not continuing any growth? And the reason for that is we have high immigration rates, so there's lots of people who are coming into the country, both legally and illegally. This shows the crude birth rates in the United States from 1910 to 2008. So this is a different value, a way of measuring how our population is behaving. And so we can look here and see what's happening. Remember, this crude birth rate is a birth per 1,000 in the population. As we start at near 30 per 1,000, and it's back around 1910. And so we see a decrease here during a phase called demographic transition, which we'll study in a later section, in section 6.4. Then during this time, during the Depression, the Great Depression, we see a real decrease here. And then when we have the the big war here, World War II, then we have the baby boom, so there's an increase in the crude birth rates here in the U.S. And then after the baby boom, we start to see a decrease again. They actually call this the baby bust. And then there's a little echo baby boom where there's a slight increase in the crude birth rates over here. So this is a kind of interesting trends here and how they relate to certain points in the history here in the U.S., including the Great Depression and World War II. So it'd be interesting if you could tell me why there was a decrease in crude birth rates in the U.S. during the Depression years, and then if you can tell me also why there was an increase around the time and right after World War II. That'd be great. So there's, if you think about it for a bit, you should be able to come up with the answer for that. Here's a figure, 6.6, showing some major changes that, if you recall, in the previous slide said help contribute to the increase in the uses or our use of or increased use of resources, the per capita use of resources here in the U.S., which beats everybody in the world. So one of the first things is that the life expectancy in the U.S. increased from 47 years to 77 years between 1900 and 2010. So imagine back in 1900, you were expected on average to live only to the age of 47. The number of married women working back in 1900 was only 8% of women, and in 2000, 81% of women working. High school graduates, only 15% of the U.S. Had a high school diploma, now 83% in the year 2000. Homes with flushing toilets, only 10%. And in 2000, 98% of homes have flushing toilets. Homes with electricity, 2%. And in 2000, 99%. Living in the suburbs, this means living away from the big city. Only 10%. Most people lived in the cities in 1900, where the jobs were. And then we had a trend of moving out of the city, onto the fringes of the city into the suburbs, 52%. How would that contribute to increased resource use? Just the cost of resources to drive to and from work, to get your kids to school, to transport food. So it's kind of related to the way cities have been built around roadways and the car, and so we'll study that later. Hourly manufacturing jobs, the wages, $3 an hour adjusted for inflation. They weren't actually making $3, but in today's economy, that would be equivalent to $3, and now $15. an hour. And then homicides per 100,000 people or when people kill people. It was 1.2 per 100,000 people, and that has increased to 5.8. There's an interesting paragraph in your book on page 127. This last paragraph that talks about other changes. So this is page 127, second to last paragraph. This is a change. So I'm going to read that real quick. It says, here are a few more changes that occurred during the last century. In 1907, the three leading causes of death in the United States were pneumonia, tuberculosis, and diarrhea. 90% of U.S. doctors had no college education. Can you imagine that? Going to a doctor at the turn of the 20th century and the doctor didn't have a degree in medicine. 1 out of 5 adults could not read and write. Only 6% of Americans graduated from high school. The average U.S. worker earned $200 to $400 per year, and the average daily wage was 22 cents an hour. There were 9,000 cars in the U.S. and only 223 kilometers or 144 miles of paved roads. A 3-minute phone call from Denver, Colorado to New York City cost $11, and only 30 people lived in Las Vegas, Nevada. Most women washed their hair only once a month. Marijuana, heroin, and morphine were available over the counter at local drugstores. Interesting. And there were only 230 reported murders in the entire country. So that's fascinating factoids about the U.S. back at the turn of the century, around the early 1900s. Okay, so several factors affect birth rates and fertility rates. So what are these factors? You got to consider economic conditions of a population and folks who live in a certain area. So one is, do you live in an area where children are a regular part of the workforce? So it's going to be an area where there is high poverty. So a family will generally have more kids. So the more kids you have, the more kids can go out and find jobs in factories or go out looking for firewood and other things and bring that money or food or whatever's essential for the household back into the household. So there's incentive to have more kids because you need it for your family's economic well-being. Another factor that might influence birth rates, this more so in a developed country, would be the cost of raising and educating children. So in a developed country, it's really expensive to raise and educate a child. So here in the developed countries, families, one of the reasons why birth rates have decreased and fertility rates have decreased is because families and women are choosing to have fewer children and improving their chances of getting a better education because of the cost of getting that education. So if you have fewer children, you'll be able to ensure that they have better education, which is important. And also it does cost money. Some estimates these days it could cost a middle class citizen here in the U.S. as much as $200,000 to $250,000 to raise a kid from birth to age 18. So that it's expensive to raise kids. Another factor could be the availability of private and public pensions. So this is what happens when you retire. If there is no way of you making money after you get older, who's going to take care of you? So we're talking about retirement. So people get things like Social Security, and they invest in retirement funds, and that's how they get paid once they retire from their work. Well, if there is no availability of that in a country that you live in, and usually in an area where there's higher poverty and so on, then you're going to have more kids so that those kids can take care of you when you get older. Then urbanization. Urbanization, or the development of cities, has allowed more opportunities for education, has allowed people better access to birth control. So urbanization has increased to a decrease in fertility rates overall because of those opportunities. And then here's a very, very important one. I think this one was discussed in the paper I assigned to you at the beginning of the year, in the E.O. Wilson paper, that education and the employment of women. So when What we've seen in populations where you have women who are better or are more educated, they tend to have fewer children. So one key in reducing these birth rates would be to provide opportunities for women to receive education, and there are a lot of places where they don't go to school at all. So that's one way to reduce these fertility rates. Other factors, continuation of the list, infant mortality rate. The number of children born per 1,000 live births who die before 1 year of age. If you have a high infant mortality rate, then you're going to be having more children. So if you can reduce the infant mortality rate, then you'll see a decline in fertility rates. Okay, so they're not, the infant mortality rate and total fertility rate are not the same thing. They're not the opposite of each other. If you have a child who dies, well, you might have two more, just to make sure that, if one dies, or you might have 3 or 4 more, because if one dies, then, you're going to have more to take care of you when you get older and to bring money into the household if you live in a high poverty area. Then another key factor is the average age of a woman when she first gives birth. So if a woman is very young, say a teenager or in her early 20s, then she's more likely to have more kids. So here's where education comes in. If a woman goes and gets an education and then has a career and everything, she'll be more focused on those aspects before she decides to have children. So then deciding to have children comes later on, and then there's less time to have any children. So not only will her remaining reproductive years before a woman gets too old to have kids are now limited, but she's also more focused on a career and making sure that the fewer children that she has are going to be receiving a better education and get all the care and the cost of raising these children all contribute to the choice of having more. Another one is the availability of legal abortions. In some places it's not legal, so that can influence these fertility rates. The availability of reliable birth control methods can also influence that. So if you live in an area where there is no availability of birth control, then how do you control your fertility rate? So that's kind of straightforward there. And then there's also religious beliefs, traditions, and cultural norms, and a lot of times religion and culture go hand in hand. So there are some areas where it's just the cultural norm to have lots and lots of kids. And then but these cultures and these populations may and will go through or can go through transition, but it all depends on many of the social and economic factors that are going on in the area. Several factors affect death rates. So 2 useful indicators of overall health of people in a country or region. One is life expectancy, which is the average number of years a newborn can be expected to live. Globally, this has increased from 48 life expectancy to 69, and this is from 1950 to 2008. So back in 1955, on average, throughout the world, you were expected to live only up to the age of 48 on average. And that's increased to 69. The U.S. during those same years, they increased from 47 to 78. And in the poorest countries currently, it's like right now, it's the age 49 or less. So in some of the most impoverished countries, life expectancy still is not that great. So another indicator of the overall health of people in a region or a country is infant mortality rate, which was defined in the previous slide. So if your infant mortality rate is high, then the overall health of your country or the region you live in is not so great. So a question we might ask is, how are people living longer, and why are fewer infants dying? Well, one is we've had an increase food supply and distribution throughout the world, although in some places food is not readily available. Better nutrition overall, medical advances, also advances in medicine, and improved sanitation. So in the waste we produce after we eat food and so on, the waste from that food has to go somewhere, and you don't want it to go into the river where you get your drinking water that can cause disease or spread disease. So it relates to safe water supplies. There's some interesting things that this greatest economy, or one of the greatest economies in the world, is the U.S. And in the United States, although our economy is one of the strongest economies among developed countries, so us and some of the European countries were very industrialized. The economy is okay. Here in the U.S., more is spent per person in the U.S. on healthcare than in any other country, and 41 other countries have longer life expectancy. So that's kind of weird. It's like, why do other countries, even though the U.S. spends more on healthcare, costs a lot to go see the doctor, why do 41 other countries have greater life expectancy? What are the reasons? Well, one reason is 45 million Americans lack health insurance. So if you look at some of these other countries, a lot more of a greater percentage of their population has the means and the ability to go see a doctor because they have a way to pay for it with their insurance. Another factor is that the U.S. has one of the world's largest obesity rates, and obesity happens when basically you're taking in more nutrients, energy nutrients, than your body can burn off. So you see increase in weight gain. Severely increasing weight gain would be called obese, and obesity is related to several diseases, including high blood pressure, heart disease, and these can all contribute to lower life expectancies here in the U.S. Infant mortality rates. Now, these are viewed as one of the best indicators of a society's quality of life because it reflects the country's general level of nutrition and health care. Interesting again, the U.S. infant mortality rate is high. It's higher than in some of these other countries, although we spend more on health care. And why is this the case? It's because there's inadequate health care for poor women during pregnancy and their infants. This goes back to those 45 million Americans or more that lack health insurance. Some of these pregnant women are drug addicted, and there's a high birth rate among teenagers. You don't have to go very far to see the teen pregnancy issues. Generally, there's a higher infant mortality rate among teenagers. There's a higher infant mortality rate among drug addicts, and overall higher infant mortality rate because of poor women not being able to go see the doctor while they are pregnant. Migration also affects an area's population size. This is a third factor in population change. This is the movement of people into and out of a specific geographic area. So why would people migrate? Why would they leave a place? Why would they want to go to another place? Why do they move? One is for economic improvement. If you're living in a country where the economy is terrible and you can't earn a living, you can't make enough to buy yourself food, you're going to leave that area and go someplace else. Another is to have religious freedom. Some countries around the world, there is a designated national religion, and if you're practicing something else, there might be some consequences for you there. So you're not free to practice whatever religion you want. Another is political freedom. To have the rights, some of the basic rights that we should all enjoy, some of these basic human rights. And to avoid wars. So if there's a war going on, you're going to move out because you don't want to get mixed up on some battlefield there and put you and your family in harm's way. And then there's another category, environmental refugees. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the economy. If your environment is being destroyed because of the activities you do in your area, whatever stresses human activities are producing in that area, a combination of also maybe natural factors as well. You have people escaping an area that just will not support the human population anymore for that area. In 2005, it's estimated 25 million environmental refugees migrated to some other area to escape the environmental problems occurring in the area. It's thought that as much as 50 million may have escaped environmental problems in the year 2010. We don't know that. It's suggested that as our planet warms and the climate changes, as global warming continues, this could soar up to 250 million before the end of the century, because we're going to start seeing some areas with increased drought, so they can't grow crops in areas anymore. Rivers drying up, they don't have water for growing crops or drinking, and so on, so they become environmental refugees. That's a scary thought. 250 million people trying to relocate somewhere. So, case study. The United States is a nation of immigrants. Since 1820, the U.S. has admitted almost twice as many immigrants and refugees as all other countries combined. Legal immigration rates have varied, and there's a figure 6.7 which shows, and we'll look at that figure. So these rates have varied because of changes in immigration laws and rates of economic growth. So we can go and we'll look at that figure, and we'll see as there's increases and decreases, this is due to either the laws for immigration or the economy, what's happening. Currently, legal and illegal immigration, so we have both kinds, accounts for 40% of our annual population growth. Remember we asked the question earlier, if our total fertility rate has decreased, okay, so the amount of children born per woman is actually below 2.1 or around 2.1, why are we continuing to increase? This is because of the immigration coming here to the United States. 40% of our growth is due to that. So, what is the historical role of immigration in the U.S.? The U.S. has always been thought of as a place for opportunity for the world's poor and oppressed, and as a source of cultural diversity here in the U.S. Between 1820 and 1960, most legal immigration came from Europe. Since 1960 today, most immigration is from Latin America, which accounts for 53%, from Asia, 25%, followed by Europe, 14%. This is that figure showing the number of legal immigrants in the thousands, and we go all the way back here to 1820, and you can see these changes here. So these are the legal immigrants, those that records have been legally kept for the numbers, and there's this ups and downs here, and so there's major points here as to where changes occurred. So right here you see this increase, this change in immigration law makes it easier for people to become citizens. So you have more people being documented as legally being naturalized here in the U.S. as a citizen. Over here in 1914, there were laws that restricted this legal immigration, so what do you see? You see a drop in legal immigrants. That may not mean that there wasn't immigrants coming in, they just weren't coming in legally. And then you see an increase again. And then the Great Depression happened in the 30s. So during the Great Depression there, it's like, why are people going to come over here if there's no opportunity to find a job or to start a business? You just don't want to immigrate to an area where there's... So here's where you see a combination of laws and economic conditions can determine whether or not you're going to be receiving immigrants or not into an area. Over here in the 80s, I think President Ronald Reagan enacted a law that made it easier to become a U.S. citizen, granting many immigrants who are already living here illegally in the U.S. Amnesty to just go and apply and become a citizen. And then again, we see some drops now occurring. Interestingly, some reports suggest that both the legal and illegal immigration has declined somewhat here in the U.S. because of our economy situation. We've been in this recession here, economic recession, for a couple of years now. So that is a recession is kind of like when your economy kind of tanks, but it doesn't tank as much as a depression does. But with that slowed economic opportunity, you're going to tend to see a reduction in immigration. So, continuing with the case study, polls show that 60% of the U.S., so they go out and they ask people, what do they think? 60% are in favor of reducing legal immigration, and there is some intense controversy over what to do about illegal immigration. So, people would like to see, the majority, 60%, would like to see legal immigration reduced, and they want to see something done about the illegal immigration occurring. Those that back this idea of reducing immigration, the proponents, cite some issues or some reasons for it. First of all, the social services that we provide here, like housing, food stamps, Medicaid, which is insurance for folks who are considered to be below the poverty line here in terms of how much money they make per year. So all of these social services are making it a magnet for people who are living in pretty bad economic conditions to come over here and take advantage of that. So it places a burden on the tax dollars. So that's one issue. And so it would reduce that burden on the American public. The other one is that it would allow us, the United States, to stabilize the population, and we would reduce immigration. It's kind of hard at this point. Some of their way of thinking is it's hard to find jobs right now, and if we're competing with but there's some truths and some untruths to some of these arguments, so we can sit here and debate it all the time. But this is what their way of thinking is. Opponents, though, those who say we shouldn't be curbing the immigration, instead we should make it easier for citizens to become legal immigrants, make it easier for those coming over here to establish their citizenship. One of the arguments says that if we were to reduce it, this is going to diminish the historical role of immigration to the U.S. The U.S. has always been a country of immigrants. And then a 2006 study was cited that suggests that immigrants and their descendants pay taxes. So they come over here, they work, they pay taxes, especially the legal ones. They also take menial and low-paying jobs like gardening or in the farms, picking crops. These are things that some American citizens, although they need a job, they're just not going to go do. The jobs are there. And these immigrants do add cultural diversity and vitality. And a lot of them can help us succeed in the global economy. We do have some immigrants who are coming in who are going to our universities and becoming great scientists. We want to keep them here so they can contribute to the development of new technologies and other things. The last paragraph of section 6.2 is interesting. Regarding maintaining the ratio of workers to retirees. You guys should read that. It's really fascinating. It's actually alarming, but I'll leave you with that and let you guys go read that.